So I'm privileged to be able to spend time with one of my good friends who also happens to be one of the biggest fighters when it comes to reproductive rights. That's the president and CEO of Reproductive Freedom for All, Minnie Timmaraju. Minnie, welcome to the Katie Phang News Channel.
Hi, Katie. I know you can edit this, so
No, we're not going to edit it.
oh,
Hi.
you're gonna keep it?
No, we're going to keep it. If it's okay with you, we'll keep it. Hey, who are you? My name's Katie.
Krishna.
It's nice to meet you. Listen, Minnie, this is life.
I
And
know.
it's a and all kidding aside, it's so relevant to what we're going to be talking about today because I feel like there's a lack of honesty when it comes to the people in DC, when it comes to the politicians that are making the decisions that are impacting us on such an intimate level, especially when it comes to reproductive rights.
Yeah.
They just want to pretend like everything's in a vacuum, that decisions are made in a vacuum and they don't have very real world impacts on our lives. I want to focus on what I call the big bullshit bill. This bill, which has so much damage that it's going to cause not only in Medicaid, Medicare, and Obamacare, et cetera. I mean, I'm not trying to minimize it, but one thing that's kind of passing by people's notice is the defunding of Planned Parenthood. So over the next 10 years or so, any federal funding for any organization like Planned Parenthood and other organizations that provide abortion services that receive more than $1 million in federal funding, they're not going to get any money. And that's just to add kerosene to the conflagration, which is the total, pursuit of the eradication of any of our reproductive rights at this point.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing it up. Honestly, there's been so much chaos with this big, ugly bill, big, so-called beautiful bill because Trump is deranged. There's been
Not
so
beautiful.
much insanity in the bill, but also from this admin that it's been really hard, Katie, to break through to the American people that this is what's happening to your reproductive freedoms, right? Like, this is happening to all of our fundamental freedoms. We've got folks getting kidnapped and snatched up in the streets by folks who aren't, identifying themselves. You've got, mass protests across the country that are being threatened, right, by National Guard, by this admin. And then you've got this bill that would gut healthcare for children, people with disabilities, dramatically impact the entire healthcare system. So it's so hard to break through the press to the people to say, and by the way, did you also know in the wake of Dobbs, where we have this forced birth crisis, we are now going to be cutting the number one funding for folks who need it for that covers the cost of actual childbirth? Because that's what Medicaid covers. Prenatal, actual birth, and postpartum. 40% of all births in this country are funded by Medicaid. So make it make sense. It's crazy. It's lunacy. And then you have this provision that you just mentioned, this defund Planned Parenthood provision. Gutting Medicaid would already be, in effect, a way to defund Planned Parenthood. But as if that wasn't enough, they drafted specific language targeting organizations, as you say, who provide abortion care from being part of Medicaid. And that is just, it's insulting. And it shows complete disregard to families and working people, because this is what you're forcing folks to do. You're forcing folks to make, you're taking the decision away about when, if, when, and how to have a family. And then you're taking away the resources they need to have that very family. It's insulting.
And Minnie, the thing that I kind of don't understand is reproductive freedom was such a huge pillar of
Huge.
the campaigns, right? Whether you were supporting it or not. It was such a huge critical component of what we went into in November of 2024. And yet I feel like other kind of things have picked up steam post
Yes.
November 2024. And is it just people are just feeling so defeated? What do you think it is? Because I agree that there's not enough of a conversation. It is not in our daily discourse. And it blows my mind that we
Yeah.
don't talk about this on a daily basis.
So we've actually been doing a ton of research on voter attitudes towards reproductive freedom, abortion care, contraception, the whole IVF, the whole thing, and also digging into some of the what happened in 2024, right? Like, take, for example, a state like Arizona, where you had folks vote for the ballot measure to protect abortion access, and they voted for their U.S. Senator Ruben Gallego, and he campaigned, like, one of his top three issues was abortion access,
Mhm.
and yet they turned around and voted for Donald Trump. There's a segment of the population that did that. And there's a couple of things that we've learned. Number one, when Donald Trump, and by extension the GOP, said, we're leaving this to the states, even though for folks like you and I, we're like, oh, I can't believe that. A lot of Americans really wanted to believe it. They wanted this to be over. They're like, okay, but this is now in the States, and I'm in a place like Arizona. I get to go and vote for it, and I get to protect myself, right? And so I'm then going to give myself permission to vote for Republicans around things like cost, around things like, my household economy, the price of eggs, you name it. And folks really, really wanted that resolution. They really wanted it. And they believed it. And that's why you're seeing with all these defund Planned Parenthood efforts, you're seeing things like attacks on mifepristone, the FDA commissioner saying he's going to review medication abortion, the whole authorization. It doesn't need to be reviewed. We all know this. We're seeing things like considering repealing the FACE Act and pardoning folks who were prosecuted under the FACE Act. That's the law that protects clinics, abortion clinics, and abortion
Yeah,
providers.
we talked about that with Congresswoman Becca Balint, by the way, but
Yes.
for advocacy, we wouldn't even have talked about it. Yes.
And, the recent shootings in Minnesota prove that we need this legislation. We actually need it to be stronger and broader than clinics, right? Elected officials and advocates need to be protected in their homes as well. I say all this to say what the Trump admin is doing really well is they're not passing what looks like a national abortion ban. They're not moving forward a bill that says we're going to ban abortion in all 50 states.
Just chipping away at everything.
They're chipping away at it. And what we're effectively trying to call it, and I think we're succeeding, is it's a nationwide backdoor abortion ban. All these little things would essentially make it impossible to get an abortion when the providers are run out of business, right? When medication abortion is no longer on the market. That's how they're going to get to abortion in states that have protected care and blue states where it's actually being funded by the state. So what it tells me is, and what it should tell your viewers is, listeners, abortion is so popular that the Trump admin and Senate Republicans are not comfortable going after it head on.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And I want to remind our viewers as well that a conversation you and I have on the regular is the fact that many of these states, including mine and Florida, for example, you have to have a supermajority to be able to pass these constitutional amendments to be able to enshrine abortion rights. So it's not just you got to have a majority, you got to have a supermajority. And we're seeing that we're coming so close by the skin of our teeth, right, to be able to hit those numbers, which should send a very clear message to any of these Republicans that, to your point, abortion is so popular that they have to find an end run behind the people's will.
And they know it, right? In Florida, as a reminder to folks, it got to 57%.
Yes.
And the threshold was 60%. So, I mean, that's in any other world, that would be a mandate. That would be a clear mandate for Ron DeSantis and his whole crew to back off and to let the people of Florida get what they want and desperately need, which is access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, which is healthcare, life-saving healthcare for many people.
And I also think I've been frustrated on many different points when it's come to certain narratives being hijacked by the Republicans. For example, when it comes to immigration, no Democrat I know wants a violent criminal living in their community. The idea that there's support from the Democrats for that is wild. But because we support due process, the Republicans have changed that, and they've disgustingly abused that to say that that's what Democrats are supporting. The other thing that bothers me too is this. Like the idea of Planned Parenthood, for example, only being an abortion provider. That's not true. There are essential medical services, including mental health services, for example, vaccines, which in RFK land I know is a bad word, but those are things that are provided by Planned Parenthood. This is not just, hey, federal funding just to make sure that you get an abortion.
Yeah, and by the way, the federal funding doesn't go to abortion care because of the Hyde Amendment, which bans federal funding. So what they're saying is, and this was also the recent Supreme Court case. We got the devastating decision on Thursday where the Supreme Court took this right away for the provider of choice piece of Medicaid. And that argument that went all the way to Supreme Court was, I should have the right as a consumer to pick where I use my Medicaid. And if I happen to pick Planned Parenthood or any other large entity that also does abortion, I should get to pick that as a taxpayer and as a recipient of these funds. Now, what both the Supreme Court said, and they said that right of action doesn't exist, essentially. And, you're a much better lawyer than me, so you can tell me if I was wrong about that, but that's the gist of it, right? Coupled with Congress trying to cut Planned Parenthood out of Medicaid. I mean, this has been the holy grail for extremists for decades. They've been trying to end Planned Parenthood by any means necessary. And it's because they don't actually care about women's health. They care about shutting down abortion care in this country. They don't care about the cancer screenings, the STI screenings, the, in vitro fertilization work, the hormone work. A lot of Planned Parenthoods are places where you can go for gender affirming care because you have folks who can do the hormone work with you, right? If you're a patient. These are the safety net providers for so many communities. If you get any healthcare all year, you might only be getting it at a Planned Parenthood when you go for your annual exam. They don't care about any of that. They don't care about the fact that Planned Parenthood does a large amount of prenatal care, right? That identifying and a pregnancy, the pregnancy test is just the start for so many women.
Which is ironic for the pro-life party. You would think that they want to make sure that women have access to good medical care, especially in a prenatal context, and yet they don't care.
Because if they did care, they also wouldn't be trying to go after Medicaid, right? Which covers all of these services. But look, specific to Planned Parenthood and the anti-abortion extremist movement, like I said, they've been going after Planned Parenthood. It's the holy grail for them. They may actually succeed this time. We just need a couple of Republicans to have a backbone beyond Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. We need a few more to say, this is not okay. This is not good for my district. But they're not even willing to do that on Medicaid. So, I'm not feeling super optimistic about the Senate right now. But I think it's also important to remember that Planned Parenthood, in addition to being like one of the most significant abortion providers and one of the most significant safety net providers in this country, it's also incredibly popular, right? Like so many Americans identify with Planned Parenthood because that's where they got their first care. So this goes back to the question you asked about what are they thinking, right? They're going after things that are incredibly popular with the American people. There is a small but extremist group of leaders within the Republican Party that are very influential. One of them is Marjorie Dansfeller from Susan B. Anthony list. I recently watched an interview she did for Fox News where she was asked, well, what's going on with your movement 3 years from Dobbs? I don't know if you saw this stat, Katie. Abortion rates have gone up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you've got 22 states with bans and restrictions, but abortions are going up. Marjorie, you're failing. Like, what are you doing about it? She said, we're gonna stop the gravy train that is Planned Parenthood, the abortion gravy train, and we know that the bulk of these abortions, the rates going up, are because of things like telemedicine and medication abortion. So we're going to go after medication abortion, and we're going to go after patients and providers crossing state lines.
Well, and we know that Donald Trump.
It's the playbook.
And it's Project 2025 explicitly.
But it's also like they will do they know they're losing. I guess that's a very roundabout way of me saying they know they're losing and they can't stop people from getting their freedom. So they're going to trap us in our states, put our doctors and patients in more danger, and try to shut down the most trusted brand in reproductive care. That's what this is.
And what's ridiculous is the campaign promises made by Trump that he wasn't going to touch mifepristone, right? Like he wasn't going to do these things. And the next thing you know is RFK Jr. is relying upon a totally bunk science report that was completely unethically presented as if it was true science to justify this revisiting of mifepristone and medication abortion, especially by way of mail. And you know who's actually, I highlighted her on my show because I was so upset that she would blame the quote left, is Congresswoman Kat Cammack from Florida with her. And I said it on the show and I'll say it again. I am grateful that she has a healthy, blessed pregnancy right now. Good for her. But last year she had an ectopic pregnancy and she went to a local Florida hospital that she refused to identify in media. And she needed a shot because she was basically going to bleed out and die if she didn't get it, et cetera. And of course, because of Florida's absurd abortion ban, because it's a 6-week fetal heartbeat ban, the doctors and the staff at the hospital were reluctant to give her the shot because they did not want to be construed as having violated that ban, which would result in criminal and civil liabilities, right? So instead of saying, you know what, I've been railing against reproductive freedom and I was failing to have the empathy because I did not go through it until I had to go through it myself in May of 2024, she then said, it's the left's fault because we have created a fear-mongering climate around the concept of these abortion bans. And when that shit happens, pardon my French, and sorry for your children could hear
No,
this.
no, I think there are
But,
other tablets.
but like when that shit happens, not only is it incumbent upon us in the media to have to call it out for the hypocrisy, but it just goes to show that they are intentionally drafting these statutes to be so vague and broad
That's it.
so that everybody gets, they're terrified on the medical professionals end. So they don't want to run afoul of it. So they err on the side of not giving the care.
I found her comments to be so offensive,
Yeah.
so disturbing. Do you think, I mean, I talk to medical providers constantly. They are in fear for their lives. And rightfully so, right? We saw the list of the Minnesota shooter, which included the head of Planned Parenthood in Minnesota and a bunch of other independent clinics. We saw, I'm old enough to remember when Dr. Tiller was murdered in Kansas at his church. So the idea that the left is fear mongering and is responsible for providers not providing the care that they so desperately, these doctors in Florida, they desperately want to provide this care. They're actively engaged in trying to figure out a better system. No provider, regardless of the political ideology, wants to be in this position. So the idea that it's the left's fault and blaming the providers is truly vile and not just missing the point. I have a hard time believing it's not intentional, that she's not intentionally doing it.
And that was the disheartening thing. I can deal with her lying about it being the left's fault. But Minnie, what bothered me, it just goes to show that there is this craven, incredibly feckless attitude where to the self-preservation mode that kicks in for these Republicans and the women, the female Republicans, just goes to show that we cannot convince them otherwise, right? Like, it's not like we have to be on a campaign of persuasion, but we're not going to change those minds. What we need to do is make sure that we do what you do on the daily, which is let everyone know and every American know, regardless of political affiliation, what's at stake. Because as I've always said for years, Republican women get abortions, Republican women are on birth control, Republican women have IVF, Republican women have miscarriages, Republican women have ectopic pregnancies. It's not just limited to Democratic women. And I want to quickly weave in another example. Adriana Smith, the pregnant woman in Georgia, laid to rest this past Saturday after her premature baby, born 1 pound, 1 ounce, was born on June 13th. Adriana turned 31 years old while on life support for more than 3 months to serve as a vessel to deliver that baby because of Georgia's abortion ban and the fact that that hospital was not going to run afoul, especially in a state like Georgia. I mean, Minnie, it is such a horrific example of how these laws are being, I think, taken advantage of as well to be able to just further that agenda of the Republicans that was explicitly put forth in Project 2025.
I completely agree. I mean, look, the first thing I want to say is, Adriana Smith's mother and her family have been through torture.
Oh.
They described it as torture. It's been acknowledged as such. I have not heard the state of Georgia take any accountability or responsibility. This was Brian Kemp's abortion ban as much as it was Donald Trump's abortion ban. All of them are complicit. That being said, there's a moment for her family to grieve. And, last week was the 3rd anniversary of Dobbs. We actually had Amber Nicole Thurman's mother with us in Washington. We did a vigil.
I saw that on social. That was very moving. Yeah.
We wanted to have that for our staff and our volunteers who do this work with Amber's mother, Shanette, and so many other leaders, because this is traumatizing work. And you hear these traumatizing stories like Adriana, Amber, and you have to still show up and do the work every day, right? So how do you do it in a way that feels respectful and is not capitalizing on the sensationalism of this, right? All of that being said, I think that that's another perfect case where the state tried to blame the providers, right? The state said, well, that's not what we meant.
Yes.
That's not what we said. But we know for a fact that both in places like Texas, where they actually just passed and signed a clarification bill that does nothing to protect patients and providers, things like exceptions, things like these, follow up, guidance from the state, they're all designed to continue to confuse patients and providers. The number one thing you could do to demystify the process, or whether something is legal or not legal, or you can be protected to do this, is to leave this up to the patients and the providers themselves. Get out of the business of legislating abortion care. Get out of the business of legislating pregnancy terms, right? It should not be politicians' decisions. Across the country, the majority of Americans, including those same Republican women you just mentioned, and we saw it in every ballot measure case, every ballot measure state, they do not want the government. They do not want politicians making these decisions. They just want these decisions between them and their provider and their medical provider. If that were the case in these cases, we would not be seeing these tragedies, period. So when we have folks like Congresswoman Kamek and we have folks like Brian Kemp say, this wasn't our intended result, or you guys created this, or you, Dr. So-and-so, you hospital administrator so-and-so, this is your fault. You should 100% believe that that is the most cynical and untruthful analysis of what is happening on the ground.
Well, what do they say? Every statement by them, every admission is a confession, right? I mean, that's totally how it works, because they're deflecting, because they know the true scrutiny behind what's happening would put blame squarely at their feet. So, Minnie, I'm a big fan, though, of telling people they can empower themselves, but I'm also a big fan of saying it's got to be how you're comfortable. Your level of advocacy has to be something that is comfortable for you. Not everybody wants to go out and protest. Maybe some people want to do something on a kind of more intimate level because they don't feel comfortable doing it. What should people be focusing on right now, Minnie? How can they go and become what I call high information Americans, get more information, and how can they continue to advance this ball? Because we all know it's not going to stop with this big bullshit bill. There's going to be more coming down the road.
So, immediately we ask that folks reach out to their members of the Senate today. There are a lot of Republican members who are extremely nervous about 2026, but also about the devastation this is going to create in their own home districts and whether they can really look people in the eye, right? When they go home for August recess. So I think there's still a window. We would love for folks to join us at Reproductive Freedom for All. We are a membership organization. You can check out our website, sign up to take actions. This is a scary time. A lot of my own staff and a lot of my own volunteers, we just had like 100 of them in town last week for Dobbs, are feeling unsafe, right? We saw reports of violence and altercations at No Kings and Hands Off. We don't want people to feel uncomfortable doing anything that they don't feel, safe doing. But that's why we've been building out and mobilizing our digital army. So just last week, just in the last couple of days, actually, not even last week, my text team sent over 2,000 texts to the Hill, asking their members to vote no on these bills. There's ways you can take action that are small, but are really meaningful and important. At this point, it's almost about volume contact. We've just got to be constantly contacting these folks in larger and larger numbers. We see these mass mobilizations on the streets. We need to have an equal amount of pressure being directly applied to these folks, and they need to hear from us nonstop. So that's why organizations like ours that have invested a lot in organizing are putting a lot of energy into Congress at this moment, but also we're mobilizing in state capitals across the country as well, because we have a lot of opportunity to move the ball. Even in the states where we've protected abortion access, you still then have to promulgate policies after you've protected and put the language in your constitution. So there's so much opportunity to do very exciting, positive work, not just the defensive work. And it's happening in states across the country where we're actually able to expand access to abortion. Places like Illinois and New Mexico are great examples where their governors and their legislatures have said, we're going to put more of our resources into abortion care. My home state of Maryland, Westmore just did that too. So there's a lot of good opportunity to do cool stuff and expand access while we're dealing with this federal crisis.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're closing on that, because not only should everybody who's tuning in go to Reproductive Freedom for All, your organization, check out the website, see how you can become active, but we're listening to the message. The Supreme Court said, kick it back to the states. I guess that's where we're going to be, right? And we also have to lean into the leadership. I always say people should contemplate running for local and state office because we need governors, mayors. I mean, we need state reps and state senators that are also fighting that fight on the front lines on the state level. And it's important for them to understand that your organization and related organizations are not just focusing on the federal fight, that
That's
you guys
right.
are keenly aware that there's something going on in each and every one of our states.
Absolutely. And there's also an opportunity outside of the direct advocacy to lobby, which
Mm.
we do. We also have an electoral arm, so we're already working. We're already started working in Virginia. We're about to start doing more work in New Jersey, where we have elections right now this year. Virginia is particularly important because it's the last southern state where you can have access to abortion care. Um, and we're doing a lot of work around disseminating the storytelling. This is really important. People need to understand we're actually still in the abortion crisis. And when we only, flood the zone with ads about these horrible stories and these terrible cases once every 2 years, we're not able to penetrate, right? And so you are doing such a great job with new media, getting this information out there. We're just trying to catch up. We're going to be launching new social platforms and new social content because we want people to have easily shareable stories to share that personalize this. So it's not like, oh gosh, I can put that aside and vote about the price of eggs. No, this crisis is happening to you right now and it hasn't actually stopped.
Yeah, that's honestly a tragic reminder, Minnie. I remember a conversation with Anya Cook in Florida, and that was one of the most moving experiences I had, sitting down and having that conversation with her face to face about what she went through. And I think it's very clear the advocacy cannot stop and it won't stop. And I'm so grateful for you and your team and for all of the people that are out there that are believing in the fact that we can fight for a future. I have a 10-year-old daughter. And, I've always said she now has less rights than I did when I was her age. And so thank you, Minnie Timmaraju from Reproductive Freedom for All, for coming to the Katie Phang News Channel. I'm always looking forward to getting updates from you. And please keep us posted because I know you'll be in the fight.
Thank you, Katie, so much for everything, but also you're doing the in-depth coverage on this issue that we're not actually seeing in mainstream press, and that's a challenge. And so we're so grateful. And I actually think you're going to get to more folks, more audience members who need to hear this message, frankly, than traditional media. So really grateful that you've taken this step and you're doing this work.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Katie Phang here. The truth matters now more than ever. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching.